You're listening to a player piano piece called the Circus Galop. And as you can probably tell, it's impossible for a human being to play this, even for a super-virtuoso pianist, like the guy who wrote the piece, Marc-André Hamelin. Hi, I'm Ben Laude, and in this video, I'll be asking Marc-André Hamelin to break down 9 of the most impossible pieces ever written for piano that were actually intended for human hands.
That is a horrifying page.
I will hand Mark a particularly daunting page from each piece and watch how his fingers and his brain compute the score right before our very eyes. Speaking of which, you can develop your mind and fingers at the keyboard under the guidance of Marc-André Hamelin himself. Sign up for a Tonebase Premium membership and you'll get instant access to all of Hamelin's Tonebase videos, from special technical exercises to an in-depth workshop on the Chopin-Godowsky etudes. Lucky for you, it's Black Friday, and that means all Tonebase memberships are 50% off through the end of the month. So go ahead and pause this video, click the link there in the description, and claim your 50% off Tonebase membership right now. Now, before we dive in, just a quick word on the pieces I chose. I restricted myself to concert repertoire composed in the 19th and early 20th centuries, roughly stretching from Beethoven's Hammerklavier Sonata through Charles Ives' monumental Concord Sonata. My choices are subjective, and there's dozens of other pieces that you could make the case for being on this list. Of course, anyone could write down a bunch of notes that are impossible for a human being to realize physically or mentally at the piano. But to do so in the service of art as ravishing as the music that you're about to hear in this video, that's something else entirely. And on that note, let's hand the first piece to Mark.
So what piece are we looking at?
This is the fugue from Beethoven's Hammerklavier Sonata. The last 5 pages, to my mind, are the most punishing. More and more, the so-called weaker fingers are called upon. This makes the whole thing much, much more difficult to clarify. The fugue is really quite a long one, and it requires very, very careful planning as far as fingering. If you take these 3 bars here, this middle one, if you can't span B flat and A together, you're forced to use the thumb 3 notes in a row. And at the tempo at which this has to go, approximately, it can cause a lot of problems. I mean, when you've figured out the best fingerings for this whole fugue, at least half of the battle is already won. But then, of course, you have to project it, and give it direction. Charles Ives, this is the Concord Sonata. He was inspired by the Concord Transcendentalists. Everything else was secondary. It's a piece that starts possibly with the greatest amount of turmoil. He wrote what he wanted, with really no regard for pianistic difficulty whatsoever. He did say that he thought there was a great message in Beethoven's Fifth, in those 4 notes. There was a complete lack of self-censorship in his case. And I find that very refreshing. You got his impulse, his musical impulse, in unadulterated form, without regard to comfort. I mean, some of it is very, very comfortable to play, and other passages are really, really very demanding.
Do you have this piece memorized?
Yes. But I have to qualify that. I wouldn't attempt to memorize something like that today. I discovered this piece when I was 13. I listened to John Kirkpatrick's second recording for a whole summer, literally. I got it in June, and then I got the score finally in September. I was a boy, I really, really don't believe in that kind of thing now, because I believe in the true message that the score, ergo the composer's intentions, can impart to us. I could go on.
Powerful stuff. Here's another excerpt. I don't know when you saw this last.
Don Giovanni Fantasy.
When I see this particular page, I'm ready to quit piano.
Because of those chromatic thirds?
He takes a scale, then he makes you do two of them at once in the same hand, and I'm just like, that's when I close the book.
This isn't actually all that scary.
Really? Could you?
Yeah. And descending. I was maybe, 16 or so. I played the Saint-Saëns Fourth Concerto, which has a couple of scales in thirds, so I had to figure out a fingering. It's a particularly wonderful sounding device in a moment of great tension.
When was the last time you pulled this one out of your bag?
I've taken this out of my repertoire in favor of the Norma Fantasy, which I like musically a great deal more. The Don Giovanni Fantasy is really admirable, I think, in many, many respects. But maybe I'm getting too old for it. Anybody who really poo-poos him as a mere showman has no awareness of what he brought us. Alfred Brendel even said, anybody who thinks that Liszt is just for pure display, better stay away from him. You have lots of these.
There's a few.
Islamey, Balakirev. Well, it's just full of intractable double notes. It requires really great stamina and great force, I think. I reworked it actually a few years ago, or at least I tried to, but it didn't come out to my satisfaction, so it's permanently banned, I think.
So when you're working on a piece of this difficulty, how would you break down a passage like this?
Very slowly.
Can I ask about that? What's happening when you're practicing?
It rebuilds all of the right motions physically, and also it reclarifies the music in your mind. I find it invaluable, slow practice. Have you ever read the book Speaking of Pianists by Abram Jasons? He once recalls paying a visit to Rachmaninoff. And before he knocked on the door, he could hear Rachmaninoff practicing. This is what he heard. Hours of this. It doesn't have to be that slow, but slow enough so that you are aware of everything you're doing and that nothing is automatic. Ravel, Gaspard de la nuit, Scarbo. Scarbo is a malevolent gnome who torments the poet's nights. He explicitly said he wanted to write something more difficult than Balakirev's Islamey. I mean, this whole triptych is one of the greatest examples of musical illustration of a literary source. By every single compositional means, especially harmonic and structural, he is able to translate this poem, so well, and the feeling behind it. To me, this is one of the 2 or 3 greatest phenomenon in 20th century piano literature. Your eye really has to be able to travel a lot and be aware of the whole keyboard at once. He really has you travel at great speed. It should be said, the Scarbo movement has become a speed contest for most young pianists. Ravel intended the general tempo to be the same as the scherzo from Midsummer Night's Dream. Usually goes It's usually played a lot faster than that. It's marked vif at the beginning, vivo, not presto or prestissimo, vif, vivace. Yeah, and he actually wants you to reduce the tempo, un peu moins vif, a little less vivace.
What does that feel like?
Take your time. It's the end of a crescendo, which has to graduate to something enormous. This is really the ultimate in horror, for this piece. After which everything vanishes. It's wonderful.
For many, what makes something hard is the degree to which it's fast and loud, and yet sometimes things can be very quiet.
That is a horrifying page. That's Ondine. This is one case where you have to know what piano you're getting. And if you don't, you have to make do with it. Every piano is going to respond differently to something like this. You see, I haven't played this instrument for quite some time. It has to be triple piano, first of all. It has to be as even as possible, with no accents. And Ravel apparently wanted the melody not to be too prominent, but sort of be part of it. Still, it should sound like a melodic unit, like a melody, but... Okay, that's enough calories spent today.
Okay. This is the page that people joke about as Rachmaninoff having spilled ink all over the score.
I never heard that. It's Rachmaninoff Third Concerto. This is in the trio section of the third movement. I actually recently fingered this concerto for Henley. It was very interesting to revisit this piece.
What is that process like? And could you pick a bar and sort of show us?
Well, just a very, very, very small example here in the second bar. And then left hand is just... So you can take a few notes with the right hand. It's very little, but it can make a difference because your right hand then doesn't have to do all the work.
I have another concerto in my hand.
You have an unlimited supply of these things. This is Charles Valentin Alkan. This is from a very lengthy work of his, which is a concerto for solo piano in 3 movements. But the 3 movements are actually part of a much larger work called 12 Etudes in all the minor keys. Unfortunately, his reputation rests on things like this, which are pianistically thought to be like unapproachable. And the exposition of the first movement, which just, where the difficulties just multiply.
You didn't just write impossible works. You showed me one earlier.
Yeah. I mean, there's a beautiful Barcarolle in G minor. And the middle section is really quite forward-looking. So very bluesy harmonies.
What do we have here?
This is Busoni's piano concerto. I find that a lot of people are sort of disoriented when they first hear it because they expect the traditional piano concerto, which it is not. First of all, the number of movements, the fact that it has a chorus at the end, and the fact that it's so distended in scope. If you are expecting something much more symphonic, then you have a better chance of appreciating it for the first time. Some people loathe this work, and others think it's the greatest thing ever written. It was an incredible period of very, very dense musical and artistic development. We owe this determination to explore, all the way from Liszt and Wagner, I think, to expand tonality, and to expand every single other parameter of musical expression. Something that really gave me a lot of headache, many, many, many years ago, from the Scriabin 7th. Second theme. So it's in 6/8. The left hand is always on offbeats. Mm-hmm. So you have. And then the second bar. And then. He repeats that a few bars later and adds. You have a quintuplet in the 6/8 context with the left hand in offbeats, 16th note offbeats. And you have to determine which voice is primary, secondary, tertiary. Yeah, that was a tough one, but that was like 40 years ago, I think.